answer. Now I'm really worried about my family and myself in future, that what will happen when the NATO leave Afghanistan. I know I will see my wife and my daughter will get shot, and myself too.
That was an interpreter speaking from Afghanistan. Here's our defence correspondent, Jonathan Beale, talking about the number of Afghan interpreters who have been resettled in the UK.
So there have been flights over the last month or so since the announcement that NATO forces are getting out. The government has expanded its relocation programme and accelerated it, said. It's got a dedicated small staff in Kabul looking through those. But what these generals are really worried about is that there are lots of people who are being rejected. So a third, about 1,000 interpreters, were sacked for various reasons, some of them serious, some of them seemingly less serious. And there is no due process. They've not been able to appeal or to have a hearing about why they were fired, and therefore they've been rejected out of hand. And these generals are saying, you've got to look out for these guys, because when, Western forces are out of Afghanistan, there is a real danger that their lives will be at risk.
That was our correspondent, Jonathan Beale there. Well, I'm joined now by Sarah de Jong, a senior lecturer in politics at York University and one of the founders of an organisation that campaigns for the rights of Afghan interpreters. Sarah, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. Just tell us, first of all, the concerns you have about the situation that Afghan interpreters are currently facing.
Yes, we have a number of concerns that we share actually with the senior staff that wrote this very compelling letter today. And one of the concerns that we have, of course, is that Afghanistan is very quickly falling apart. I mean, the Taliban is gaining ground at the speed that nobody quite expected. And those who are associated with Western forces are explicit targets for the Taliban. Our concern is that the scheme as it exists now still excludes more people than it includes. And it excludes the people that Jonathan just mentioned, those who have been terminated. And, the high number of 35% was dismissed for disciplinary reasons. And some of them were rather small, like he just mentioned, but also people who were, for instance, contracted by third parties. And there are astonishing examples there, including, for instance, the interpreters who worked at the British embassy in Kabul, some of which worked for 18 years at that same embassy. Now they have been told that they will be excluded just because they weren't directly employed by the British government, even though their role is, of course, in the service of the British government. And finally, we have people who are laborers, cultural advisors, and they are often receiving emails that reject them from the scheme because it says that they were not working in an exposed role. Unfortunately, again, we have seen that people such as cooks have been the subject of attacks from the Taliban, and some of them have already been killed.
So Sarah, just talk us through the numbers. We're hearing different numbers of people, 800 in one instance, 2,000 in another. And of course, we're talking about their families as well, because it can't just be the interpreters who are relocated. Their families face danger as well.
That's correct. It's a very good question. And I think the confusion around the numbers is because often the MOD, when you hear the higher numbers, are actually including the family members. So the number of 2,000 is including the family members. Basically, with the Afghan relocation assistance policy, as it was introduced in April of this year, the government plans with relocating about 800 former staff members. But we know that they already employed 3,000 interpreters and another 4,000 or something other supporting staff that worked in enabling roles. And so the numbers don't quite add up. Of course, we don't think that everybody will apply for the British scheme, but looking at the number of rejections, we know that there are more people who are in need of British protection.
And just briefly, if you can tell us, the actual visa process, can it be done from the capital, Kabul? Is that process easy and straightforward? Clearly not, from what we're hearing.
Yes, I think that's a really new concern that we start having now because, unfortunately, because of the situation in Afghanistan at the moment, there's almost an exodus of people. People are quite desperate to get passports. And so the waiting times have increased. And of course, also Afghanistan is affected by COVID. And so services have been suspended. And so there's a very interesting proposal, I think, that has been raised by some people, which would be, can we process some of that bureaucratic visa paperwork in the UK and just bring people over onto an entry visa, bring them to the UK, and then do the rest of the processing of their status later.
process in there. Indeed, a really difficult situation as things unfold, and the situation is fluid as we've been reporting. Sarah, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme.